KUHSLP, Hot Springs, 97.9. It's the Brian and Sometimes Ben show. Joining us right now is Dr. Ben Wright. We introduced him earlier. A great man, highly intelligent man. Also, we want to point out that I've talked to a few of my professor friends who think very highly of him. Also, a former student of his who told me that he wears purple suits and has worn a cape before to class, but also was really amazing at taking very complex ideas in literary history and breaking them down so you could understand them. She did say that he was very patient with those who wanted to learn, and those who did not, he was very quick to use the rod on, especially those who wasted his time. But she did say he was very inspiring and taught her a lot. So we're going to go ahead and say hello to Dr. Ben Wright. How are you today?
Well, I'm, as Minnie Pearl used to say on Grand Ole Opry, I'm just so proud to be here. I believe that's Okie because that's what I grew up speaking. I spoke pure Okie.
Because you're from Oklahoma.
Well, I'm from Oklahoma, and I'm from really kind of, I don't know, I've got bad blood. I mean, I'm sort of a mixed background, and my father was, you say redneck, I mean, his was swollen because he was a country boy. He didn't have his first pair of shoes till he was 15, and he carried those, walked all the way 7 miles into Oklahoma City, put them on when he came to the 7th Street, which was last street in Oklahoma City in 1910. He was 15 years old. He put them on and he said, I'm going to have shoes from now on, and I'm going to get me a white shirt, and I'm going to be a citizen. And sure enough, he got his first job that very day selling newspapers for a man named Aaron Weizenhofer, whose son Max Weizenhofer owns most of the major theaters on Broadway, and 5 of them in the West End, and is in the Regions Board of Directors of Oklahoma. I mean, they became a very rich family in publishing and oil.
They dropped his name in producers by Brooks.
Oh, Mel Brooks is my hero. I just watched him. He was hilarious the other night. I watched him on The History of the World. He has Moses coming out. This has nothing to do with anything except
one of my favorite scenes. Yeah.
I mean, he comes out. Moses comes out carrying these 3 tablets, and he's come out from the cave, and he says, "God has given us these," and he drops one. These 10 commandments.
10 commandments.
One of them. I love Mel Brooks. He's just one of my heroes, and of course, producers. Mm-hmm. One of the greatest films in history. You know, Springtime with Hitler
and Germany.
And he has in the history of the world, he's the Torquemado, who actually was a Jew, converted, became the most brutal and vicious torturer of the Spanish Inquisition. Mm-hmm. And he's got him dancing around and making fun of, I mean, it's just, and they're all dancing around in their robes, as they did dance in their SS uniforms, right?
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Oh, brother. So I'm glad we have Mel Brooks, of course, Blazing Saddles is something I can never stop watching.
Mel Brooks was, and it's important to remember that when he first did The Producers, he did get a lot of flack from people for it.
Oh, good
To
grief.
which he said that the reason why he did it is because someone like Hitler, their power comes from the fact that we're afraid of him, that we know that he's evil and powerful. When you make them a joke, you take away all their power, and you delegitimize them, which is why he did The Producers.
Well, this is why you know that Charlie Chaplin did a whole spoof. What was that called? It was called The Dictator. Mm-hmm. By the way, the only godson I have is Jewish. It was in a Jewish ceremony. His name is Zachary Benjamin, that's for me, Adler, and he has just directed 2 films about the Cray brothers in England, those gangsters, those horrible people. But now he has the rights to do the last film that Charlie Chaplin was going to produce and direct, and never got to do it because his health was failing at that time. Yeah. Living in Vevey in Switzerland, and he had just faded away in Vevey. But it's amazing that my godson, Zachary Benjamin Adler, Zach Adler, is going to produce and direct that film, too, about the last one that Charlie Chaplin
That is awesome.
ever had in his possession to produce and direct. Charlie Chaplin, do you realize that at the time when he was producing, directing, acting in films, he was the richest man virtually in the world. $1 million a year, and that was considered enormous Now we talk about multi-billionaires, right?
Yeah. It's also interesting too. Hitler was actually a big fan of Charlie Chaplin before The Dictator.
Isn't? Oh
And
my God!
he really was. He thought he would screen the Charlie Chaplin movies.
Well, I highly recommend, if I may interrupt,
Mm-hmm.
seeing the brilliant biography of Charlie Chaplin, in which, the person who hated him with a passion was J. Edgar Hoover.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he engineered his passport being taken away from him. But J. Edgar Hoover was convinced that he was a Jew. Charlie Chaplin was not a Jew. His original name was Spencer. The Spencer family they're a family that's known in East End of London. His father was an alcoholic. His first performances were doing imitations of fall-down alcoholic drunk bums. That's what the little bum is all about. But the Spencer family are actually Spanish gypsies. I happen to have had a relationship that became a engagement to be married. We were affianced for 6 years with Penelope Spencer, who became the star of Please Sir, a TV series. And she looked exactly like Geraldine Chaplin, Charlie Chaplin's daughter, that he had with Una, who was the girl that was the daughter of Eugene O'Neill. Did you know about that?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Yeah, Eugene O'Neill. She had the choice between J.D. Salinger and and Charlie Chaplin, who were both in their 50s. When she was 18, she decided on Charlie Chaplin, and her father disowned her and would never come near her again. Amazing. But he was an alcoholic, and he was just a man of, all these people are unusual characters, right?
They are.
It's amazing that I know all these things about these people, but I've been I think I've been an actor, I've been in films, I've been around with people. I knew the man whose first name was Mo. He had the rights to all of Charlie Chaplin's films. And my godson was able to get one of these, this last most important one. But it was amazing because in the film about Charlie Chaplin, you have this dinner party with J. Edgar Hoover, and Charlie Chaplin is present, and Charlie Chaplin is making fun of J. Edgar Hoover, who doesn't realize it, and playing tricks on him and laughing like hell, and Hoover decides he's going to destroy the man. Well, you don't know. My last book, one of my books called Marcuse Wept, I talk about working with Angela Davis.
Right.
For Herbert Marcuse. I was his teaching assistant, and so was Angela, in teaching philosophy. And I'm going to say this now because it's in the book. The FBI approached me and wanted me to spy for them because, of course, J. Edgar Hoover hated blacks almost more than he hated women.
Right.
And there was Angela Davis, a black woman. Read my book, Marcuse
A very
Wept.
powerful black woman.
Oh, I saw her up in Little Rock for the first time in over 40 years. She now is directing a foundation very much like my Clarion Call. Clarion Call is dedicated to ending recidivism in prison. And we have the same motto. She was just finishing as editing the most recent biography of Frederick Douglass, the man who was a freed slave and learned to read, whipped almost to death when they discovered he knew the alphabet. And Frederick Douglass said this: the answer to slavery is not freedom, it's education. And Angela and I both say the answer to incarceration in the prison systems of America is not freedom, it's education. I urge my men to get the GED if they haven't gotten it already. It used to be a requirement to have a GED before you could be released, and some of the men were unable to read and never were able to get it. I myself didn't learn to read till I was 10, so I understand what it's like to be called a dummy, hopeless, oh my gosh. But the point is, Angela and I both agree totally on this. The answer to all of this problem with our prisons, we have more people in prisons than anybody per capita in the world. We represent 1/5 of the world's population, and we have 1/4 of the world's imprisoned populations. Huh? There's something very strange. Oh, well, that's what Clarion Call, my foundation. I go to prisons twice a week. And I hope you're not, I don't believe you're ageist. I have been going to prisons for 51 years. Yeah.
Wow. See, this is the thing, is that earlier we were talking about evil, and we were hinting on the idea of concentration camps and stuff like that. And real quickly, to start it off, you wanted to read something, correct?
Yeah, I just want to read what a 14-year-old child said, who did, by the way. You know, it's amazing. There is the other person, I am co-godfather with another man. I won't mention his name. He's a major film producer. He wrote, well, he got the Academy Award for writing A Brilliant Mind. You may remember that film? Mm-hmm. And he wrote and produced, produced Cinderella Man, and he did most of the writing of all of the Batman films.
Oh.
His mother grew up in Auschwitz. She was put there as a pre-teenage girl, survived it. After the war, she got to South America and then was brought to California. And the family that chose me to be the godson of young Zachary also had helped her family survive, and their son then became a major film producer in Hollywood, and he still is. I won't mention his name.
Okay.
But this is a 14-year-old girl named Hedy Epstein watched with a classmate from their school's window in the town of Kippenheim. What we saw were men being marched down the street 4 in a row, accompanied by SS men who were hitting them with whips and urging them to walk faster. The feeling was just indescribable. Fear, anger, frustration, wanting to do something and not knowing what to do. Conditions in the concentration camps were harsh. Theodor Haas, 21, when arrested during Kristallnacht, the Crystal Night, knew that people used to frighten their children by telling them, if you do not behave, you'll end up at Dachau. Haas then lived for 3 years in Dachau and found it far worse than he imagined. We were issued 1/4 of a loaf of bread to last 3 days. In the morning, we picked up at the kitchen a cup of roasted barley drink. There was no lunch. At dinner time, sometimes we got a watery soup. We were forced to sleep on straw. As time went on, the straw disintegrated and we became louse-infested. The guards delighted in making weak and ill-clothed prisoners march or stand at attention in rain, snow, and ice for hours at a time. As you can imagine, death came often due to these conditions. And sometimes a guard or a group of them would single out a prisoner and beat him with canes or a club. Sometimes, to further terrorize a prisoner, the guards would form a circle around the prisoner and beat him unconscious. 3 times a day we were counted. We had to carry the dead to the square. Each time we had to stand at attention in all kinds of weather. We stood wearing next to nothing, while our tormentors had on sheepskin coats and felt boots. That's only a little bit of it. But I have known people who have survived. I didn't know the mother of this film producer, but I've known survivors of Auschwitz, Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau. And it's just, there's a man living, well, I won't be, there's some people here even, but these are people, they still have the tattoos on their arms. They tattooed the children too. But it was pretty remarkable. But I've also known people who survived some other death camps. Mm-hmm. I think I told you I helped in the writing of the experience of surviving the Hanoi Hilton, Colonel Robbie Reisner's book. And he's the one who comforted John McCain after John McCain was first tortured and, broke. And he said, look, we all did. You're human. Don't torture yourself anymore. We all broke. And he comforted that man. He worked out the whole code system, the SOS tapping system. And it was funny because he did survive the entire time. And it was amazing. He had been shot down in his fighter jet something like a week after his picture had appeared both on Time and Newsweek as the most outstanding fighter pilot in the United States Air Force, having been decorated as an ace in the Second World War, a double ace in the Korean War, and an ace in the Vietnam War. Wow. When he fell into the hands of the enemy in Hanoi, they went to work, and they worked him more than anybody.
One of the things that we talked about earlier in another show was how the Holocaust affected Judaism and how it changed Judaism and Christianity in a way.
Well,
but one of the things also that we talked about in another show a long time ago was how the Korean War had such an effect on America itself, because it showed how easy it was as you said,
To be brainwashed.
To be brainwashed and to
And
break.
the Manchurian Candidate is a prime example. Do you know who? Well, Frankenheimer, I met him once in Rome. I was in films, as you know. The last time I was in a film, the last one was Godfather 3, many years ago, 1990. And I met John Frankenheimer there. And he was the one who directed and was the genius of the Manchurian Candidate. Bobby Kennedy, you know, Robert Kennedy, spent his last night alive in the home of John Frankenheimer.
Really?
Yeah. And a magnificent man. And the person who, because the Manchurian Candidate didn't do that well in the cinemas, people were startled and shocked by what it, well, the plot line was, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah,
It's a man who is so brainwashed that he attempts to assassinate, or does he assassinate the president? I can't remember.
He attempts to assassinate. He's brainwashed into not understanding, not realizing that he is the one that is going to kill the president.
But he doesn't know it.
Right. They did these amazing, or these, no, I don't mean amazing. That was the wrong word to use, but it was these little things that they would do in North Korea. They would, for example, one of the things that they would do is if they had someone who was like very patriotic, they would torture him for days on end, and then they would send in a Korean dressed up as an American to sit with him, give him a hamburger and French fries, talk to him, say, I'm a fellow guy here, what are we going to do, how are we going to get out of this? And pretty soon the person would begin to bond with him. And
that bonding would become the new programming, the new mental programming, the new brainwashing.
And it was so effective that when they got back over to the States, they began to realize that there were certain spies here in the United States that did not realize that they were actually spying.
Yeah.
That's how clever and cool it was.
Well, and of course, in certain forms of hypnosis, there are triggering devices that the victim or the person who's been hypnotized, the hypnot-E, doesn't know. Yeah. A triggering device may be the batting of one eye, or it may be the sticking of a tongue out.
Certain words in a certain range.
Or certain words. It's almost like that. I mean, it could be a note, a certain note. There was that incredible thing that happened where a bomb blew up when a certain note, C-sharp minor or something, was hit, and the entire place blew up. That was in Korea that happened, wasn't it? In an orchestra.
And the Nazis were experimenting with that too.
Yeah.
Sounds that could either force a human to not hear or not see, or just cause a bomb to go off too. Nazis were experimenting with that.
Well, I've been a teacher most of my life too, and I worked with because I am dyslexic. I still am. I will always be. And for me, it helps me in my poetry. I see things backwards, both ways around. Yeah. Some people said my poetry depends on inside-out rhyming. Well, it could be called the broken back rhyme, and Anglo-Saxon is actually a technique. And maybe they were a bunch of dyslexic Vikings. But anyway, the point is that I was working with the supposedly very difficult children in San Diego. They've been expelled from every school in the system, and I worked in the summer to enable them to learn to read. And we used a thing called a tachistoscope. Have you ever heard that term?
Yeah, I have heard it before.
Okay, well, a tachistoscope flashes an image super rapidly. I don't know how many split seconds it is on the screen. And somehow you can get people to, you play a game and see who can remember it. And it's a way of learning how to then read. But you have to be careful because tachistoscopic speed at a certain rate can induce an epileptic seizure.
Yes.
This was discovered in a very tragic way in some of the discotheques where they used tachistoscopy flashing lights, thinking it would lure and lull people into a sexy, sensual state, and it actually induced some grand mal seizures.
Yeah. I actually learned about this from, Michael Crichton. That was in Michael Crichton's book, The Andromeda Strain. That's where I first learned about this.
It's funny we were talking. I even met Michael Crichton. I mean, maybe somebody I haven't. Yeah. There are a lot of people I haven't met. I always wanted to meet. Well, okay, I've got to tell you a cute story about Charlie Chaplin and Marcel Marceau.
Oh, okay.
You know that Marcel Marceau was the greatest mime artist in history, right? Mm-hmm. When Marcel Marceau died a few years ago, my best friend, who is a film producer and writer named Lionel Lober, who wrote Georgie Girl and wrote and produced If It's Choose to Be, Must Be in Belgium, and some other amusing films that I told you about, the Passover Plot, about Jesus and John the Baptist as pranksters, and they turned it into a religion. Anyway, he called me and he said, well, did you hear that Marcel Marceau died? I said, yes, I got to see him as a boy. When I was in Paris, my first time at 16, I saw him perform. And he said, well, he was a fairly close friend of mine. I said, what? He said, yes, Marcel Marceau and I and Burt Lancaster were going to make a film together. And he told me a rather amusing story, and I'll share it with you now, about Charlie Chaplin. I said, oh, my God, where's this going? He said, Marcel Marceau began his career doing imitations of Charlie Chaplin, who, as the little bum,
Little Tramp, yeah.
the little tramp, did imitations of, frankly, it was his alcoholic father, and that put him in the poorhouse with his schizophrenic mother, of course. You know about that. He did imitations of fall-down drunks, and one time Marcel Marceau encountered Charlie Chaplin at Orly Airport in Paris and walked up to him and said, Mr. Chaplin, do you know who I am? He said, I know who you are. Yeah, you're a pretty famous fellow. He said, well, I guess so are you. And he said, yeah, I've actually seen you perform. He said, I'm Marcel Marceau. And may I tell you how I started my career? I would love to know. I started my career by doing imitations of Charlie Chaplin in his first imitations of the Little Tramp. May I do so for you right now? And he did perform his imitation of Charlie Chaplin.
That would have been amazing to watch.
And Charlie Chaplin applauded and said, bravo. And the only way I can repay you for this great compliment is I shall now do an imitation of Marcel Marceau doing an imitation of Charlie Chaplin. And he did, and the two of them embraced, howling with laughter. Do you like that story?
I do. I love the stories of these artists together.
Well, I love the whole idea that artists and writers and performers, I mean, let's face it, we are performing, hot mic art. I always love that when somebody say, well, you have a good face for radio. Well, can you hear my face over the radio? I remember once when I first started on radio, a DJ, a disc jockey, a radio broadcaster said to me, I hear your pipes. You must be hot out there. What a way to speak. I hear your pipes. Well, what he heard were the overtones. And I actually have overtones that I can see on a screen when we have that happening. But I also sometime will perform my show. I actually did it on on my tape recorder. I don't know if it registered. I did what's called overtone chanting. Have you ever heard of that? I was trained in Tibetan, Mongolian overtone chanting.
Huh.
Shall I do it now and see what happens?
Yeah.
Overtone chanting is if you've ever been around any of the ceremonies having to do with the Tibetan Buddhists, and the Mongolians are also are Buddhists of the same Vajrana order, that is the lightning bolt, Vajra, which means laughter and music, you're already in heaven then. You don't have to go anywhere. That's what they believe in. That's why Steve Martin would be a living saint. Plays the banjo and makes you laugh, right?
Right.
Well, anyway, they play the bowls. They have the brass bowls, and they'll rub a wooden mallet around the top and make a tone. And they'll have several bowls going at once. You've seen people do this with crystal glasses, right? Well, that is a healing. It's considered medicinal. And then the lamas, the young monks or old monks, any monks. I've actually got some Gnume monks here on CD, but we can even play and try it out. They have the largest, finest basso profundo voices in the world. And here I'm running away from actually performing. I'm going to do just some overtone chanting. By the way, did you ever see the film The Dead Poets Society?
Yes, I have.
Do you remember when the boy has first performed in the play as Puck, right?
Right.
And he has been told by his father that that's it, and it's just before he attempts suicide, remember? He leans out the window on a cold, frosty night, and you hear these voices. That's several people doing overtone chanting. Most people don't know that. That's in an upper register.
Wow.
I actually did this in San Francisco a couple of times for friends of mine in an art gallery, and it set off the alarms. And I also found as I walked everywhere in San Francisco at night when dogs came running out, I do that, and they go running away because it's in a register that
Yeah. That affects
most
them.
normal people don't hit. But
See-
could you hear the overtones?
I
That's
mean, not,
curious, isn't it?
but I have headphones on, so
Okay.
it comes out.
Well, we'll wonder
More
what
clear.
your customers will say about
in,
this one today.
Tweet in or call in. That really is an interesting thing because we were, you've all seen in the for those of you out there who the idea of healing is very intricate within Buddhist philosophy and doing it yourself. That you see them all the time doing the Om, which is
Money pon the Om, money
Yeah,
pon the
yeah.
Om, money pon the Om, money pon the Om, money pon the Om, money.
and this was actually another torture technique
Yeah.
that
Oh.
was tried in Korea too. So
Well,
to
the
have
playing
them
of
sit-
bolero.
right?
Did you know the playing of bolero drove many people completely mad?
Yeah.
Da 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 da. We don't
There-
have it, do we?
No, we don't.
Oh, God.
I actually did a show
Thank
on
goodness.
suicide songs. There was this one song, and I forgot what it was now, but it played, and supposedly it had the most suicides in Europe.
Of which?
So
What was the song?
I can't remember it now. I did a whole. I'll have to go back and research it, but supposedly the song was put out on a record, and 8 people who played it committed suicide right after they bought it. Now,
Oh my God.
this is, I actually listened to the whole song, and I didn't commit suicide.
You have
but-
the song?
Well, I had it on a disc.
Oh.
So I played it on. It's on one of the shows. I'll try to find it again. I have a lot of shows recorded on here. But to get back to the techniques that were used, because I think this is what is interesting, is in Korea when they were using all these techniques. The thing about what we were talking about earlier too, is we read about the Nazis and the people in the camps. We read about the Korean prisoners and everything that happened to them. And you, with your Clarion Institute, the thing about it is, as you told me while we were eating dinner on Wednesday, you don't really realize how easy it is to break a person. And within his book, Goldberg argued in Hitler's Willing Executioners that the German people were just as guilty in a blood libel type thing that has always been put on the Jews, that they had committed these acts and done these acts, and they were fine and went along with it. That they were completely complicit within the murder and slaughter of the Jews. Now, most Germans will tell you they didn't actually know what was going on. They may have smelled weird things coming from the camps, but they had no knowledge of it. But also, while you have been working in prisons, I mean, how have you seen, working with prisoners, their humanity change while they have been incarcerated?
What is that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, what was the question?
As you've been working with prisoners,
Yes.
how have you seen their humanity changed under it? How have you seen them be broken by a system that was created to rehabilitate them?
Well, the unfortunate thing is that the prisons may claim to be rehabilitating men, but there's a man that, well, I'll use his name is Vic. You won't know who he is. It's just an abbreviation. He's been in there since he was 18, and he received a life sentence with no possibility of parole. And he was an accessory after the fact. He wasn't even there in the actual killing. And he wrote a paper, which I delivered to some of the Department of Correction people, saying that probably one of the worst tortures is causing men to have to sit in a room and watch daytime television. And he said it's mind-numbing. It's mind-numbing. Now, of the men I've known in prison, I've seen some phenomenal situations, but in actual fact, there was a man named Scrap Iron Charlie who served 36 years altogether in prison. But we worked in the prisons together for several years, and he died just about 2 years ago. And I was trying to find some place I thought of putting his body with, I was supposed to take care of the body, to put the body with one of these medical facilities where they could, do dissection. I discovered there's all kinds of strange rulings. Anybody who has served in prison for over 18 months cannot be an organ donor. They are considered totally contaminated, and I couldn't even give his body to the medical school.
Why not?
Bizarre. Now, I don't know what happens to the mind, except that I've also been told that after about 18 months, a man reaches a mental condition that cannot be reversed. Well, that's also the same about people who've served more than 18 months in the military. Well, I've served many years off and on in the military. And it's pretty remarkable. I work very much by helping others in prison to regain a sense of their dignity, to maintain that dignity. And one of the best ways is what happened when I had my program with Steve Fettig, who is here, and I've recorded it. It's on YouTube now. Steve kicked heroin, cold turkey, was able to get off heroin in his second year of prison. He was imprisoned, given a 4 to 60-year sentence. He served 5 years. In the last 3 years, he had discovered that by writing poetry and by learning to play guitar, that he could maintain, or actually discover, who he was and maintain that identity. And he has written some of the finest poetry I've heard. One of the most remarkable poems, and I had him read it after we discussed, was when, after he had been put in the most extreme condition, the hole. Anybody who's been around prisons or knows anything about it or has ever seen, well, like the, what was it called? The something or other Redemption? What was it called? The Scrimshaw Extension?
No, Shawshank Redemption.
Shawshank Redemption.
By
How many
Stephen
times
King,
he was
yeah.
put into the hole? But he was kept in there for 2 months, 2 weeks at a time, and so on. I know a man, and I was actually talking with him this morning, and he can't pick up this program. I wish he could. He was put in the hole for 1 solid year. And it was actually for something he had not done, but they just decided they would use him as a scapegoat because he was the most popular and the most prominent person in his block. Being in the hole can be either a deprivation. Well, usually there's no heating or air conditioning, so if you're in a cold climate, you're going to be cold as anything. In a hot climate here in the middle of summer, you're going to be like in an oven.
Right.
Usually, the lights are on all the time. But in some of them, the lights are off all the time. And the food you're given, as my friend Edward told me today, sometimes it's just barely enough to survive on. It literally is like a bread and water diet.
Oh,
But
Lord.
then they don't want you to have too much energy. They will let you exercise maybe once a week, but sometimes in the hole, not at all. Imagine what happens to a person if he can't keep himself to a regimen of, say, push-ups, sit-ups, knee bends, that sort of thing, in that very small. And how do they... I had a friend who became one of the most prominent, well, actually he was an actor in films and one of the greatest poets in all of England, who actually, since he had memorized many poems in his education, was able to recite these poems to himself. But they're totally without any input, anything to occupy the mind. The very first prisons in the United States were in Philadelphia. They were what we take the word penitentiary deriving from. It was an attempt by the Quakers to make people penitent. It was on Walnut Street. It was back in the mid 1800s. And men were put in a single room with a desk that had a Bible on it, and they had a bunk, and they had a hole in the roof that let the light in, and they were to read the Bible and become penitent. And almost all of them went stark raving mad. What I'm getting to with this with Steve is that when he came out of the hole, the last time he ever had to serve in the hole, he wrote one of the most beautiful poems I've heard called Metamorphosis, which is a word he'd learned when he was in high school, meaning change. I talked to him about a cartoon I have in my dining room, actually up on the mirror. It's a cartoon from the New Yorker, and it's a butterfly leaning over a cocoon out of which is crawling this little creature that is the chrysalis. And the butterfly is saying to the chrysalis, you have to really want to change. Well, that's what happens in prison. A man has to really want to, as this man had also discovered the book at the time he kicked heroin by Viktor Frankl, was his experience in Auschwitz, in which he developed the theory, which he called later logotherapy, that you have to believe in something and hang on to it for dear life. Most of the men, I asked them, where do you want to be next year? Where do you want to be 5 years from now? Can you envision yourself as a totally different person who will never return to prison? It's not anywhere on the menu of your life. And the way you do that is you get out of prison, you go into new playgrounds with new playmates and new playthings. That's why my halfway houses are so important. Men are living together. We're getting them jobs. We get them involved in 12-step recovery programs and churches. They find something to believe in. Right? Now, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Well,
I
you
know,
have in a way.
Well,
I mean,
I'll tell you the most remarkable regeneration and recuperation was Rick Kuchi, whom I met when I first began work in prisons in 1965 in the Synanon facility in San Diego, California, with Superior Court Judge Norbert Ehrenfreund. As a matter of fact, we've been in a play together. We both played murderers in the play. Isn't that bizarre? And Rick Kuchi was a murderer. He was caught, and he was sentenced to death, and was awaiting execution in San Quentin. And he performed a play written by Samuel Beckett called Krapp's Last Tape. It's a one-man show. It's about a man who plays these tape recordings of all the girlfriends he's ever had. It's a really heartbreaking story. It's a heartbreaking play. But he performed that for himself as he awaited execution. He received a pardon, but not a full pardon. But there had been a glitch in the legal proceedings, and so he was then sentenced to life in prison rather than execution. As he rejoined the prison population, he wrote a play called The Cage, C-A-G-E. And he had also read, in addition to Samuel Beckett, some other playwrights. And he wrote this play, and it was about people in prison, and he would only allow men doing life term for murder to be in his play.
wow.
And that play was performed. I saw them in San Diego in 1965 because Governor Pat Brown had seen the play performed at San Quentin and said, I want all my prisons throughout the state and all the prison facilities to see this play. And they went all over California. They then went all over the United States and performed in prisons throughout America, and then performed in theaters throughout America and Rome, Paris, London, even Moscow. And I next saw him in 1972 performing at the Roundhouse Theatre in Hampstead in London. And I went backstage and I said, because I'd gone backstage before, and we bonded as friends immediately. Strangely, I don't know, I always bond with people like this for some reason. And he was so delighted to see me and introduced me to everyone as an old friend of his. Well, and I said, how did you get to do this? He said, we're all on life parole, dependent upon remaining in theater. A couple of weeks later, Samuel Beckett came to see the show, went backstage, told him he'd heard about him doing Krapp's Last Tape, asked him to perform it for him. And when Rick performed it for Rick Kuchi in an empty theater, other than the two of them, Samuel Beckett said, from now on, you're the only man I will endorse or certify as worthy to play Krapp's Last Tape, and you will now become the director for all of my theater in Berlin. And that's it.
That's awesome.
Nick Nolte played the part of Rick Kuchi in a film called Weeds. Terrible film. Awful film.
Yeah.
Miswritten, untrue. Only Hollywood could have messed up a really beautiful story like they did
Which
with
is
Nick
what
Nolte.
Hollywood does, yeah.
They sometimes do. Although Ernest Hemingway was delighted with the rendition of For Whom the Bell Tolls, because Gary Cooper was his close friend. And who was the actress we were talking about?
Ingrid Bergman.
Huh?
Ingrid
Bergman,
Bergman, yeah.
who talked me out of being a conscientious objector, as I told you when I was 17.
Yeah.
Isn't that bizarre?
That is
How
so
do I never
bizarre.
meet these people? All the beautiful people in my life. You're looking at the clock. Are you getting ready to play some music?
No, your show's going to be coming up soon. So,
We have to do one?
your show's coming up.
I know,
So
we're going to
BB&C.
stay on.
Yeah, we're still staying on. I was just looking at the clock to make sure.
Okay.
I did want to, real quickly, I did want to say that we did get notifications that they did hear the tonal shifts. from their radio.
They did what?
They did hear the tonal shifts.
Who did?
From the radio. A couple of listeners
They
replied
heard
back on Twitter.
They could actually
While
hear
you're
the
doing
upper
your
tone.
chant, yeah.
What?
They're claiming that they heard it.
The what?
So they're claiming they heard your
upper,
chant.
The high.
Yeah.
It's a high pitch. I actually have some recordings of Mongolians doing Mongolian upper chanting in a musical sense in some of their folk music, and it's really bizarre to hear that high pitch along with the very low notes. Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't know if it translated into radio. So.
Well, I wondered how it could come across. I've never ever tried it, and it's curious because I've been doing it for years and years. I was actually in Tibet, and I was in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, and blah, 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 blah. I've done an awful lot of work with the Tibetan refugees. And I don't speak Tibetan, and I have a Tibetan trumpet in my home, but I can't play it. I gave the other one to the first Tibetan Buddhist temple in all of Mallorca, where the Dalai Lama actually came and saw it there.
Oh, wow.
I got him to come to Spain, and I did the first. There was another whole story about being in the House of Lords, and that's hilarious. I was the coach of Lord Longford, who was the champion of the underdog, who, with Lord Brain, did the first pitch, the first what they call debate on behalf of the Tibetan refugee people. And after we were just leaving the House of Lords in the Grand Rotunda, Lord Brain's wife came up, and she was talking kind of like that, kind of like a hillbilly.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, Lady Brain, where are you from? She said, well, Brain here, he come over to North Carolina. I was in college there, and I said to him, you are some sweetie, and you're a knight and all that stuff. Well, my goodness, and a lord, would I be a lady if I... And she said, I just grabbed him. And I said, well, have you ever gone back to North Carolina? She said, no, we really haven't. And I said, do you ever miss any of the music? She said, well, somehow. I said, when was the last time you heard a yodeling version of the Lovesick Blues by Hank Williams? And I burst into singing the Lovesick Blues because I knew I could yodel off the rotunda there in the House of Lords. My girlfriend, Penny Spencer, said, Ben, that is pretty amazing. You looking for Hank Williams?
Yes.
I got a feeling called the blues, oh Lord, since my baby said goodbye. I didn't kick into it like that now, but I did do a little yodel. As kids in Oklahoma, we were always yodeling. And there, Hank Williams, there you go. What have we found?
Looking for Lovesick Blues.
It must be in there.
It has to be.
Is the honky tonk blues.
But I was basically what we were bringing up too was this idea of how, because we were talking about evil in concentration camps, and also real quickly, because I promised I would get onto this, is the Stanford experiment.
Yes, indeed.
Done by make sure I get this, because I keep saying Zimmerman instead of Zimbardo for some strange reason. But what had happened was, while he was teaching, he had asked his students to create their own experiments. And so a couple of his students basically used their dorm rooms to create a prison. They came back and they were fighting about it afterwards in his office, saying that the people were way too mean and too cruel to them that were guards. And so he decided, well, I want to do this experiment, but I want to do it right. I want to psychologically test the people.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do a coin flip. I want to see if good people will abuse the power, if bad people will not. And so the first day, everything went kind of well. The prisoners were given $15 a day, plus told they would get their meals, and they followed the instructions very well. But torture was started at the first day, where they would make the students line up, and each one would count down. The first student would say 1, the next one 2, the next one 3, and the guards would make them keep doing it in different orders, fast, slow, just to see what would happen. Then eventually, there was kind of a protest the second day, to where they put their bunk beds up to prevent the guards from coming in their rooms, which was their prison. So the guards asked the professor what to do, and Zimbardo said, you're the guards, do what you got to do. They broke down the beds, came in, stripped them naked, and wouldn't let them eat meals and forced them to stay awake. Mm-hmm. Now this would continue, and as it went on and on, the police would become more, or the prison guards actually would become more and more torture. They would let more and more stuff slide, and Zimbardo himself began to slide. Prisoners who were bad weren't allowed to take a shower. They were forced to stay up at night. They were punished. by doing menial tasks of taking boxes and moving them into one room, then taking those same boxes and moving them into another room, and then moving them into a third room before moving them right back to the place where they started. And they would make them stay all night doing this. The good prisoners were given more food. They were allowed shower privileges. And so what would happen was, when it finally came day for the parents to come by and see the prisoners, he realized that the gig may have been up. So this Professor Zimbardo put a very attractive, the hottest girl he could find on campus, made her a secretary, and told her to tell the parents, well, your son can't come out now because he wants to eat a second dessert. So this would automatically make the parents angry at the child, because they're like, we came down here, we only get an hour to see him, and he's wasting 30 minutes. The truth was, he didn't want them to smell them without having a shower, notice that they were, didn't sleep, they were rattled and crying and different stuff like that. So automatically the parents were against the children, because they were like, why did you make us wait? Now we only have 30 minutes to see you. In truth, the guards were keeping them away from the parents. Finally, when they would see them, they would only have like 10 minutes left, and the parents would be angry at them. One parent did object and say that my son is sick. He doesn't look well. He looks bad. He looks really, really sick, and he's tired. To which he realized, or Zimbardo did this kind of sexist thing to where he turned to the father and he was like, well, we had a lot of girls leave on the first day. Do you want your son to leave too? To where the man automatically went, oh, no, my son's tough. He can take this. He can outlast anyone. And he would also say, well, there's football players in there and they're taking it okay, but if your son is having problems, and the father would go, no, he'll stay. So eventually, just to wrap it up real quickly, he was seeing himself being forced into trying to hide his experiment and portraying his morals. And it wasn't until his girlfriend finally came in and saw the children crying, dirty, filthy, these college students given $15 a day, that she said, what the hell is wrong with you? What are you doing? This is torture. This is what the Nazis did. Immediately he snapped out of it and he ended the experiment there. But it was an experiment to show just how quickly people, college students from the same background, would easily devolve into what we would see as evil, as abusive.
Well, the Milgram experiment, and I think I told you, Peter Gabriel sent me a copy of a tape, and I will play it here on my program that I have still, and it was not released with the album So many years ago, 30 years ago, was about the Milgram 37 experiment. I don't know why it was called 37, but where people were told that they were delivering electric shock to people in the other room, that they could see through a glass panel, and they were told how high the shock was going, and in actual fact they were getting people so that they would compete with others to get their subjects to do better, were delivering shocks that were actually potentially fatal. Yeah. But they weren't. This was just what they thought.
Actors were on the other side of the...
Yeah, and some of the people in the room who were subjects were faking having virtual, attacks, and when they were delivering the shock. But when the people later were told what they'd been doing, they were horrified and couldn't imagine that they had done that, but they had.
Philip Milgram also pointed out in his study that there were people who would refuse at first and who didn't want to do it, but if there was one of the white coat people who were in charge of the experiments, if they would prod them and push them.
And they wore white coats, and there was a presumption was that they were medical doctors.
They were medical doctors, so they knew that the person could take it. So they but they also found out that a lot of the sympathy that they had, if, for example, if they would ask them a question, they would get it wrong. If they would ask them, like, 3 questions later, they would get it wrong again. And then 3 questions later, they would get the same question wrong again. As their patience began to erode, the harder they would hit the button, which just showed that they were saying, this guy can't help himself. They were all actors, though, is what made it so fascinating, though.
I want to say something. This is 2:00, and it's
BB&C
usually the time that I introduce myself as Big Ben and Company, BB&C, Everything Sometimes. And this is what we're doing today. Brian and I have found a way of delivering what we think is important to think about. I'm trying to bring as much material about our community and about our mindset and the renaissance that we believe could be actually happening in Hot Springs. But we're talking about the world as well. And by the way, I want to lament the death. People say somebody passed. Well, I don't know. He's dead. Muhammad Ali is dead. And he was a very courageous man in terms of civil rights. He was a great boxer. I gather that our president, Barack Obama, has a pair of his gloves, as does a friend of mine, Edward Ruscha, who was a boxer.
Wow.
And Edward Ruscha is a painter and got to actually have, in his studio, he showed me a pair of red leather gloves that belonged to Muhammad Ali. And what was the great line he said? Something like a sting like a bee.
Yes, flow like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
Yeah, it's lovely. And he was truly a poet and in many, many ways. And I think that we all will lament his passing. There were a lot of people of the extreme right wing who were very angry because he refused to serve in the military. And they say, well, Elvis Presley did. Okay, that's Elvis.
Elvis was also really protected by the government. He was not going anywhere near any danger.
Yeah, and they had his own cooking, his own kitchen.
He had his own mess hall, and he was given his own bunker.
Yeah, that's right. But anyway, we have other things happening. Next week, I'm going to be talking to Suzanne Davidson, and she and I are going to be talking about the music festival, which is launched tonight, actually, at 6 o'clock. 6:45 on the steps of the Arlington Hotel. And that is going to be, I'm not sure what it is, but they have a composition, a fanfare, and then inside the hotel later is some chamber music. So it's all starting right now, right here. And this morning, I was talking to the director of the Red Cross, who was delivering some material to my church, the Unitarian Church in the village, and I'm going to have him come on the broadcast, and also I'll have Deborah Carroll, who's been involved with a great project down here on Bathhouse Row, the Maurice Bathhouse, on Saturday afternoons from 2 to 4. Little children, all children, are allowed to come in and paint the walls. They're given paint and brushes, and the walls are canvases, actually, and it is a marvelous, marvelous way of showing children that being a creative artist is a lot of fun. And I was amazed at many of the compositions that I saw. I said, my gosh, that looks like the work of Joan Miro. And then I remembered that when I was in Mallorca, Joan Miro was still alive, and he would go to a center for children who were suffering from Down syndrome and would conduct art classes. And frankly, a lot of his work and the children, they understood and he understood. But art and painting, my abstract expressionist friend Fred Hawks, whose Duende Man is on the back of my book, Duende, we all in our art are trying to take those impulses inside us and put them into a more articulate, compassionately caring expression for our fellow man. It's a kind of namaste in action. I see the spirit within you. This is my spirit coinciding and co-responding with your spirit. This is what we're hoping to do on this radio program, right? Now, BB&C is now in action. But my guest today is Brian Caldwell.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We were talking, and this is really maybe coming from left field or from the top or from I don't know where it's coming from. I told you that I'm also this Wednesday, I'm doing an interview with a man whom I admire enormously, Rabbi Eugene Levy,
Love him.
who formerly was director of the Hillel Foundation at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. Now, Hillel is a philosopher of the 11th century whose phrase I use all the time, if not now, when?
Right.
Right?
And he was a heavy influence on Jesus and his teachings.
Well, right, yeah. But it's to do it, what's holding you back? Now is the time. Now is the most important moment. And Eugene Levy and I are going to be discussing a festival that is what many of the Christians would call the Pentecost. It's 5 weeks after the celebration of the Passover feast. And it's the celebration of the harvest of wheat. Do you know much about that, Brian?
Yeah, from scholarly things, I don't practice it.
But what?
Yeah, but I don't practice it myself.
Are you of the Jewish persuasion?
Yes,
I love that. I'm of the Caucasian persuasion, and I'm kind of like Woody Guthrie when it comes to religion. Woody Guthrie was asked, "What do you believe in, Woody?" He said, "All or nothing." And I love it that Bernie Sanders has started singing "This Land Is Your Land."
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was on a kibbutz. Did you know that?
I did not know
Bernie Sanders, he's a nice Jewish boy from the Bronx, and he went and lived on a kibbutz. What do you know about kibbutzim?
Well, I know about in Israel when they would build them up when Israel first started.
They're still being.
Yeah, they're still being built today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Well, they're people working together, kind of like KUHS.
Community radio.
FM radio, 97.9. We're all contributing. And, of course, I think this is the kind of the most fruitful and profitable sort of work to be doing. But we were going to be talking about the whole idea of the Holocaust. I gave you something I did as a printout.
Mm-hmm.
The first concentration camps were not in Germany.
Right.
They were in South Africa. The Transvaal, the Boer War. By the way, Boer in Dutch means farmer. My friend Saskia de Boer means Saskia the farmer. The Boer War, 1900 1902, the British were not winning on the battlefield, and so they raided and destroyed and burned all the homes of the farmers who were in the field fighting as soldiers, took their wives and their children. One time a woman had just given birth in the last 24 hours, as in that piece I gave you. And they were put in what were then called, at the first time, concentration camps. Unbelievable. 27,000, was it?
Yeah.
27,000 women and children died in those concentration camps. They were denied proper food, nutrition. They'd have one toilet for several hundred people. They slept on the marshy ground, no covering for their bodies in the middle of winter. It's an amazing time. But we had something like that at Andersonville, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
The Civil War in our own country. And, hey, before we throw stones, let's find out how many stones we have thrown. And
something interesting, too, in the article you gave me,
mm-hmm.
I liked in there where it had the note that none of this stuff was ever mentioned in the British history books.
No, never
which
taught
is
in the British schools.
Right.
How much of the Trail of Tears Death March was taught in most American schools?
Oh, that's brilliant, yeah.
And how many times have we, until recently, recognized the concentration camps, one of which, or maybe several of which, were in the Americas, in America, for the Japanese?
Here in Hot Springs, the rehab center that you see up on the hill.
The rehab center?
The rehab center, which was, built as a Civil War hospital, was later used in World War II as a concentration camp for Japanese Americans. If you've ever seen Star Trek,
yes.
Mr. Sulu's parents were kept there. And here in Arkansas, they were taken from California, from San Francisco, and shipped here, and in another holding area too. And little Sulu, George Takei, grew up in a concentration camp during the time of the war, and it affected him mightily. Both as right now, he's doing a Broadway show on his experiences. It's off Broadway right now, but they're planning on moving it to Broadway about his experiences.
Yeah. I met him at the Arkansas Symphony Orchestra when he was there.
Cool.
One of my closest friends in California as a student was Tad Yamaguchi, who grew up in a Japanese concentration camp. This is kind of amusing. He married a friend of mine, and she brought her son to some of my lectures. I was teaching the whole thing. A child shouldn't have been there. He was about, I don't know, at that time he was about 8 or 9 years old, but I said, anybody can come. I was teaching Nathaniel Hawthorne The Scarlet Letter, and he was so taken, he asked his mother that he could change his name to Nathaniel, so he's now Nathaniel Yamaguchi.
That's awesome.
In honor of, I know that sounds funny, one of my favorite professors was, get this name, Sack van Berkovich. He was named for Sacco and Vanzetti, the people who were executed, and perhaps wrongly. They were supposedly anarchists. There was no clear bona fide prima facie evidence against them. And here he was as a professor all of his life. He carried that, and he actually became one of the great professors at Harvard University, and his specialty was the Puritan epoch and all the cruelty enacted by the Puritans in the witch hunts.
Yes.
Is that bizarre? By the way, the last I heard of Sack Van Verkovich, he was a wonderful man. He liked me a lot too, and I was always a little bit of a, as you can imagine, a bit of a radical.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and he now the last I heard was editor-in-chief of the Cambridge University Press in Cambridge,
wow.
England. He's a brilliant scholar, but imagine having somebody putting a name like it's like a boy named Sue. Well, you know what John Wayne's original name was, don't you?
No.
You don't?
No.
Marion. Marion was his name. Yeah. I met Shel Silverstein, who wrote The Boy Named Sue, the song.
Yeah, I love the
I
song.
met him in Marin County once, and I said, I know I'm not a groupie, but I am sure an admirer. I have to come and tell you how much I love that song of yours. By the way, we were talking about Randy Newman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's, again, a strange case of something becoming politically very incorrect, which was actually, I don't know if we can just say it's fun, Short People, that song. And, of course, I told you I made it popular on the Big Ben and Company in Spain because it wasn't banned there. And when I met Randy Newman once in Hollywood, I said, you'd be surprised why your needle time is so high in Spain. He said, yeah, we've noticed I get a lot of royalties. I said, yeah, BB&C, Big Ben and Company. I launched you. And the other DJs used to play what I would play. And then I played a trick on them. Should I talk about this over the air? Sure,
Yes, yes.
why not?
Why not?
It's a funny fact of life. I had been in a Why was I in a bus station in Mexicali? Well, I was in a bus station in Mexicali, and I saw a cassette tape of a country western singer I've never heard of called Sleepy LaBeef. And I took it home and played it, and it was one of the most awful, well, it was just terrible. And so I took it back with me to Spain, and I played Sleepy LaBeef and said, here is a very, probably one of the hottest new items in the country western market. And he's a man who speaks for the common man, and he is a man who really doesn't mind. Can you find Sleepy LaBeef on
Yes.
there? It looks like it. Yeah, you found him. You found him. Do you have any of his music?
Yes, I do.
Can you play anything by him?
Right here. Yeah, right here.
Big Boss Man. Is it coming over the air?
Yeah, they
Let's
can hear
play
it.
it.
Big boss man, can't you hear me when I call? Big boss man, can't you hear me when I call?
He's shaped like a frog, in case you're wondering.
No, you ain't so big, you just tall, that's all.
Well, I think that's enough. Don't you think?
Yes.
I think you get the picture. Sleepy LaBeef received a contract to do a one-man show at the Barcelona football stadium, and it was a sold-out concert. He still doesn't know what happened, how that happened to him. Sleepy LaBeef. It was my little joke on the other disc jockeys who were stealing everything they could. As a matter of fact, another DJ stole the recording of probably the greatest honor I've had. I'm going to share this on the air. Now I've gone blank on his name, and I use his postage stamps. The black piano playing
Oh, Ray Charles.
Ray Charles came to do a concert in Palma, Mallorca, several thousand people, and I did an interview with him, and he liked my voice, and we were talking about things that, I don't know what it was I got him talking about. I've actually got the interview on tape, and I'll play it sometime on this radio, about what it was for him, the blues, and what it meant to him, and having lost his sight as a young boy. And he talked like, I couldn't believe it. And as I left the green room, the dressing room, and went back out into the audience to record, he said, I'm going to give you some sugar, brother. And I said, what? I'm going to give you some sugar. Okay, give me some sugar, baby. Whatever. He came on stage and he said, I've just been talking with my friend Ben. He's got BB&C, the radio program you all listen to here, and he's recording this concert tonight. But I'll tell you something. I want to give him some sugar here. I'm going to sing a song. I'm going to make it up on the spot. I'm going to take Oh, What a Beautiful Morning, and I'm going to do a yodeling version because he's from Oklahoma, and we're over here in Spain, and this is for you, Ben. And he slammed into, banging away on the piano, a yodeling version of Oh, What a Beautiful Morning. one of the other DJs grabbed the tape that I had, and I've never seen it since then. But I heard it. I've actually got it on some tape somewhere, just like the thing I have with Peter Gabriel. I have some great. I've taped a lot of very unusual things. But that Sleepy LaBeef, isn't that amazing that you turned him up? But we were looking for something else before the program began. And I promise I will go and buy it. I'm sure I can find it probably in Little Rock. I can't believe over here at Best Buy you can't buy any classical music. But it's the song, the symphony by Rodrigo called the Concerto de Aranjuez. And it is one of the most beautiful guitar pieces I've ever heard. And it was composed by a man named Rodrigo. I hope I can find a rendition by Segovia of Concerto de Aranjuez. But I will be using that. Oh, you have it on there. Is it clicking on?
Right.
Well, you probably have a material about Concerto de Aranjuez and tell you all about Aranjuez. Aranjuez is a place in Spain, just below Madrid. And it is, do you actually have some music there?
I do.
Oh, that's wonderful. It is a place where one of the mad kings, Philip II, who was considered probably the most bird-brained of all the kings that ever ruled, but the people loved him. He had a kind of Michael Jackson mentality. He loved childlike things, and a palace was built for him in Aranjuez, and the gardens and the canal going around, serpentine canal going around and around the gardens, had all these silly little dolls, many of them performing the act of urination into the stream itself. He loved that, anything silly. But Aranjuez became a place where lovers go in the spring because they have a very special fruit called fresón, or, in plural, fresones. Fresa is the word for strawberry. These are little petite strawberries that are so much sweeter than any strawberry you've ever had. And that's about it's a place, I don't know if there's any place else. But those are produced there in the springtime, and I used to go there in the spring, and I would also go to one of Ernest Hemingway's favorite restaurants. It's called the Green Frog, and they did a specialty with the asparagus, which they put in sea salt into the skillets and prepared the asparagus. And then we had frisones, and of course, trucha de Navarre, trout of Navarre, of the mountains. And that's trout that's slit with pieces of, well, what we have is a little pieces of very finely, with little pieces of garlic and of cured ham, the ham of the high mountains. And this trout and the asparagus and the frisones, well, it's just a delight. Can I tell another incident about Aranjuez?
It's your show. Yeah.
Well, that's right. Well, it's in my book, and I don't think you'd ever hear about it anywhere else. And if you ever read my books, you'll say, "What?" I became friends with several people who were bullfighters. I was always fascinated with them. I was horrified by the event itself, but fascinated by the whole idea of how such a thing could have captured so many people's attention, so that people became aficionados, that means affectionately, passionately involved. There was a man from California, a Chinese American named Bong Wei Wong. He had received a degree in engineering from the University of California, and he came to work as an engineer in Spain, but became fascinated with bullfighting, and he became a novillero, that is, an apprentice bullfighter, a cape bearer, and was so brave in his handling of the bulls with the Veronica cape, which comes from the word of Veronica, who supposedly gave her handkerchief to Jesus, and he dabbed his tears. And the Veronica cape is the big cape, the one I wear, actually, and it's a beautiful, beautiful big black or navy blue cape. He was so skilled with that as a novillero that he was immediately then using the muleta, the little red orange cape and the sword, and killing the bulls, doing the final faena, F-A-E-N-A, faena, that last dance of death, a moment of truth. And he was actually promoted to full matador after only 2 years. Very rare for anybody. And the first Chinese American in history, and was considered the bravest bullfighter in all of Spain.
Wow.
Well, he and I became friends. I was a student, and I was also an actor in a film there, The Marauders Desperados, and I was a dialogue director, and I played the part of the general chasing Jack Palance, who was Quantrell of Quantrell's Raiders. What a funny life I've had. I couldn't keep it straight most of the time. I have to read the script and find out what part I'm playing. I hope I get to play the good guy this time. Anyway, I went to the corrida, the bullfight in Aranjuez with Bong Wei-Wong. Little did I know how famous he was everywhere we went. He was like a movie star. Everybody wanted his signature. And then I said to Bong, I said, you know, we were sitting in the stands, and I've read about you, and I can read most of the Spanish. It says you're the bravest bullfighter since Manolete, the man who was considered the greatest in all history, who was killed in action by a Miura bull, the great hero of all bullfighters, and you're compared to Manolete. He said, it's because I do it to Chiquilina. I said, the what? And he said, well, I do this funny thing. I go out into the ring, and I stand in front of the barrera, the barrier there, with just the Veronica cape, and I stand against it. And they let the bull out, and he comes rushing out. I said, but wait, the bull is supposed to be tested with those capes by your cape bearers, like what you used to be. He said, that's why they say I'm brave, because I don't have him tested. I just let him come right at me, and at the last minute or second, I decide which way he's going to hook. And I just swing the cape that way. I said, what? You have no idea which way he's going to hook? He said, no. And you just risk your life on that? He said, that's why they say I'm super brave. It's just Chinese fatalism. I said, what? He said, I'll never be killed in the ring. You know how I'll go? I said, Bong, come on. Pull the other one. It's got bells on it. What? He said, I'll probably be home visiting my parents for Christmas sometime. And I'll probably be in a car, and somebody will hit me on the Hollywood freeway, and I'll be skin, teeth, hair, and eyes all over the pavement, and bye-bye, Bong. I said, what? 1 year later, Bong was home visiting his parents for Christmas holiday, and he was in an automobile, and another came crashing across the central barrier and rammed straight into his car. He was the only one driving in the car, and he was wiped out in a head-on collision on the Hollywood freeway.
Wow.
I can tell you how some other bullfighter friends of mine have gone, but that's for another program. Well, is it funny? I don't know. It's
No, it's fascinating.
a curious
is what
story.
It is.
I write about the bullfighters, and I write about their moment of truth, and being with them afterwards, seeing the bruises and the cuts when you don't see them from the stadium for where you're sitting, how close the horns have come. And one of my best friends, Henry Higgins, he was actually, that's another interesting, I'll tell that. It's a good, people might find this interesting. We're supposed to be talking about the Holocaust, and how do we end up in the bull ring, in the corrida? Is there any, I don't think there's any reason. Oh, well. What?
No, we'll just go with it. Just flow with it.
What?
We'll just go. Flow with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Why not?
Well, Henry Higgins, his real name was Enrique Cañadas. And he was from Colombia, spelled with an O, not a U, Colombia. But his mother was British, and she lived in Pollenza in Mallorca. She was British. He met Brian Epstein in the major hotel, the Palace Hotel there in where Hemingway used to go, and Garcia Lorca and everybody, the main hotel. Epstein, who was the manager of the Beatles, you may remember, who managed and promoted the Beatles, and he asked Brian Epstein to be his manager, to promote him as a bullfighter. He was just starting then as a novillero. He had not even become a matador. Novillero was an apprentice, but he was fighting every fight, everywhere, anywhere, and just, almost getting killed every time trying to prove his bravery. Brian Epstein said, you speak perfect English. He said, well, my mom's English. I mean, I'm bilingual, like my daughter is bilingual. Marina Wright Muelas. She's bilingual. Anyway, he said, why don't you call yourself the first English bullfighter? Doesn't Enrique mean Henry? He said, yeah. He said, call yourself Henry Higgins, from My Fair Lady. And he said, yeah. He said, but I don't have time to manage you. I'm too busy with the Beatles. They just, They just drive me nuts. Of course, as you know, he
Yeah.
died of a heroin overdose, and he was a very mysterious man. Nobody really knew much about him. So Henry Higgins called him, Enrique Cañadas, then thenceforward called himself Henry Higgins, the first English bullfighter. He wasn't the first. There had been some others, but nobody had pulled this off before. And sure enough, he got a man to promote him, to put up the money, and within a short time, he was a full matador. You become a full matador usually at San Isidro week, that is Holy Week, that is the week of Easter, at the bull ring in Madrid, and that's where he did it. But Henry was incredibly courageous. Once a bull had hooked him in the mouth with its horn and torn his mouth all the way over his ear, just ripped it. But it hadn't killed him. And the surgeon there, he just said, clip it back together. I'm going to go on with the bullfight. And the surgeon actually had put some clips, clipping his face back together, because his opponent that day was gored and taken away to the hospital. And Henry went out and fought his bull with his face, looking like a bad Frankenstein job.
Right.
And the crowd absolutely adored him because he put the bull away, and he was awarded, I think, probably 2 ears and a tail, which would be the max. I don't think they ever have any more than that. Henry died hang gliding, visiting his mother in Mallorca.
Wow.
Well, so it goes. I won't tell any more of these stories, but I'm still thinking about the people who survived the death camps. I'm going to go back to Viktor Frankl. A friend of mine here was at a conference. My friend is a psychotherapist. It was a conference of psychotherapists, psychologists, practitioners of psychology and action, psychiatrists. And Viktor Frankl was a registered psychiatrist, which means he was a medical doctor and a psychotherapist as well. And at the end of the conference, he said, "Are there any questions now?" He talked about his writing of his book and his theories of logotherapy, which just means word therapy, logo. His word, the lux tenebris, was Latin. That phrase is what he said sustained him when he first came to Auschwitz. His wife was separated from him when they got off the train. She was taken right into the gas chamber, murdered, and then cremated. He didn't know that. He thought he would see her. He survived all those years, 4 more years, thinking of her and her beautiful face. They'd only been newly married. And he had read a poem in Latin in which the primary image was lux tenebris. Lux, L-U-X, light. Tenebris means flickering, small flickering light. And when he was out working in the fields, digging and throwing his pick into mud and stone, he saw a flickering light in a farmhouse over the horizon. And he thought, oh, that's my wife, and that's my life, and that's my light of being. That's my lux tenebris. When the war was ended and they were released, he discovered that his wife had died early on. But he still had the lux tenebris and the image, and it had kept him alive. He said that men that had nothing to hope for, nothing to dream for, nothing to believe in, died. My first commanding officer, well, let me go on with this man, because I think it's a very important thing in all of our lives to have a lux tenebris. This show, this radio program, my belief that I can bring people to a greater awareness of themselves and of the community and how they may serve the community, as corny as that sounds, whether it be with the Red Cross or with the music festival, or whether it be going down and helping with the soup kitchen down at Jackson House, which I highly applaud, or maybe helping me with my work with my men who are coming out of prison. There's lots of things to do in this town, lots of people doing them. And I had some of those people on this show the other day. I had Milton Duke, who's very active, and I'm going to have many other people here. Deborah, my gosh, Deborah Carroll, who's Martine Carroll's wife, was at the Maurice house painting the walls of the children.
Oh, that's cool.
There are people doing things. Well, anyway, my friend, the psychotherapist, was at this convention, and at the end of the talk, Viktor Frankl was asked, don't you hate those people? Don't you want to torture them and kill them? And he said, no, no, no. I want to understand. And if I understand, perhaps it will never happen again, we can stop it happening. Schindler's List, that great film, what was the producer-director's name?
Steven Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg. He went there. He went to Warsaw. I've been to that actual square in Warsaw. And I burst into tears. I couldn't bear it. I mean, I just could feel it. And he had a lot of trouble making that film because of his own.
Yeah. When you walk through there, you feel the ghost.
What is that?
When you walk through,
You feel, you've been there.
You feel the.
I felt
You
it.
feel the ghost. You feel the pain and everything else in there, just through sight. And a lot of the buildings have been blown up. The Nazis were destroying evidence as they were
Yes.
running away, but you still can feel
Mm-hmm.
everything there. It. Everybody who leaves isn't the same.
There's a wonderful film that Meryl Streep made, and that man Wood, I can't remember his first name, called The Holocaust. And it's about the Weiss family, W-E-I-S-S, Weiss. And it traces them all through the Holocaust. I happen to know one Weiss family that escaped. And I helped her when she became a young actress at Cambridge University, and then when she was doing some theater in London. And I helped her get some confidence, and now she won the Academy Award. Rachel Weisz. She married the man, he does the James Bond films. You know who I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So I've had, actually the only person who's ever been a real student of mine in films was Jack Palance, but that's another whole story. Boy, have I rambled all over the place. But the main thing I wanted to get across was what Viktor Frankl said.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to hate, I don't want to torture, I don't want to murder. I want to understand. I was a battalion commander in boot camp, in Recruit Training Command, United States Naval Training Center. I'm going to say something on here that I did write about in a book, but I'm going to talk about what happens sometimes. My roommate was a young man who looked like Captain America, the All-American boy, blonde hair, blue eyes, was a great athlete in college, was on the admiral's staff with the 6th Fleet, and he arranged cocktail parties. He was dashing, handsome. And when he came back, he was brought back to America to finish out his time in the service and was given the office of battalion commander. A battalion commander, and I became one too, has the rank of Lieutenant JG or lieutenant. That's like captain or first lieutenant. And the command may be of several companies. I had 12 companies of 100 men each. I had 1,200 men in my command as a battalion. This man at the time had 80 men to a company, and no, 80 men to a company, and 10 companies, there was 800. But he had drill instructors, DIs, who were chief petty officers or first-class officers, petty officers, like the gunny sergeant you saw in Full Metal Jacket. Had those men working under him. And he started reading material that praised the work of Himmler and Hitler and Goebbels and all of those monsters, and began to affect mannerisms that were neo-Nazi, to put it at best, and began to think of himself as a young stormtrooper. And I began to suspect there was something wrong. And one day he said, hey, after we have lunch at the officers' club, I want you to come by my battalion. And he had what was called the retraining battalion, 4013 it was called. It was for men that couldn't make it anywhere else, and they were really intensifying the training. I decided to accompany him. We walked into the battalion. We walked up the stairs to the second deck. He had several men standing with their faces against the wall, with their hands at their sides. And as we went along, he hit each one in the back of the head with his elbow, smashing their faces. They screamed in pain. And as they did, they went down. He'd scream at them and have one of his DIs come out, and they verbally brutalized these. I said, I'm putting you under arrest. Consider yourself under arrest. I'm leaving this building, and I'm going to have you put... And I had him put under arrest and relieved of his command. He moved out that day as well from where we lived. And he said, I'll get you someday. And in my book, I talk about when I had written a poem which was protesting the war in Vietnam, and I was to give a reading at the park in La Jolla, California that night, a candlelight meeting. This man, this is years later, long after the military service, about 10 years later, he arrived at my doorstep and he said, I'm delivering a message from the Minutemen. I'm working with them. We're a paramilitary organization. We work out in Borrego Springs, ready for the new revolution to overthrow your corrupt government. And we have decided that you are an evil and un-American and they want to kill you. I'm wanting you paralyzed from the neck down. If you deliver this poem tonight, that's exactly what will happen.
Jesus.
By the way, I'm not paralyzed, if you notice. I'm perfectly.
Yeah.
The man who went up on the stage with me that night was the man who painted this painting, the Duende Man, Fred Hawks. At that time, he was 92 years old, and he said, I'm going to stand up there with you. They'll have to take us both out. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
Well, it's pretty amazing. But these people, there are these paramilitary, what are they called? What are these people called? They're called vigilantes or something. It was what McVeigh was involved with.
Right. Yeah.
What are they called?
They call themselves freedom fighters.
The
But
freedom
what,
fighters.
what they actually
Well, and
are.
the Minutemen, I imagine they're still going on, aren't they?
Yeah.
Unfortunately. I think that's why it's important for us to speak about what are the elements that plant the seeds which blossom into something like the Holocaust or the brown shirts or Kristallnacht or the entire Nazi movement became as a National Socialist Party to help the people. Adolf Hitler, in his book My Struggle, Mein Kampf, which, by the way, is still a bestseller.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's sold, last time I looked at it, it's at least over 12 or 13 million copies. Yeah. We used it as the first book at the University of California for humanities. And the idea was to be, know your enemy.
Know your enemy.
Many of my students, at least two of which were Jews, said, if I had read this book at that time, I would have joined the Hitlerjugend. Huh? Yeah. Amazing.
Well, it should also be noted that the rise to power, at least for the Nazis, was,
The
1922 all the way up.
You said the Reich.
Reich, yeah.
R-E-I-C-H. Reich. What does it mean in German?
I don't know.
The ruling. Yeah.
Ruling. Okay.
I believe.
I'm not sure. Ich vergesse alles.
Mhm.
It's been over a decade since I had German in college.
Okay.
But I did want to point out that it was a long process to power. And even at the time when Hitler came into power, what I think scares me the most is that there were certain groups that thought that Hitler was too liberal. He was even after pretty much right before they were taken into camps, there were still elements that argued that Hitler wasn't doing enough. And that was inside Germany at the time,
Wow.
which is shocking and scary at the same time.
Well, it really is. I'm looking over here at some of the music. Is there some music you'd like to play? Because I wanted to ask you about some other music I want to put on here.
Go ahead and we'll play some commercials, and then we'll
Okay.
come back with some music.
Okay, good.
Okay, all right. You want to do it the KUHS part?
What is that?
KUHS LP Hot Springs.
You do it.
Okay, it's the BB&C Big Ben and Company here on KUHS LP Hot Springs 97.9 LP. We'll be right back.
This is Big Ben again. That's the Conway Twitty song that I believe that Carolyn Scott asked me to play for her, and I said I would do my best. I don't know how it fits in with all of our discussion of bullfighting and the Holocaust and good heavens, who knows what. But the point is that we have gotten it in there. But there's another song, the Folsom Rhythm Blues the Folsom Prison Blues by Johnny Cash. It's curious, I want to tell you that in actual fact, Johnny Cash never served time in prison. Merle Haggard was in San Quentin for 3 years. And there have been others that have served in prison. But Johnny Cash did perform this at Folsom Prison. And he wrote it when he was still in the Air Force, a relatively young man living in Germany. A lot of people don't know that. Now, he went to jail a couple of times because of his drunken, disorderly, and drug-induced states. He actually wrecked a truck he was driving that started a fire that was a forest fire and burnt the side of a mountain, and he ended up paying over $250,000 in damages for that. And he did have a very severe drug addiction, but he only went to jail, and he always paid his way out. But the Folsom Prison Blues is considered by many people who are sort of enamored of these ideas about prison, and there's these hang down your head Tom Dooley is about a man who's about to be hanged, and that's not exactly pleasant because that's about the last song he's ever going to sing, the swan song. It's curious because the culture of the samurai warrior dictates that the samurai warrior, before he thinks in his last fight he's going to die, that he's to write a haiku poem in just a few 17 syllables in black ink on white rice paper. And when I asked my first commanding officer, who had survived the death march from Corregidor and had survived the imprisonment at Bataan, was there anything, Captain Rogers, he was a full captain of the Navy when I knew him, he was my commanding officer, was there anything positive that you could say you got from your experience in the death camp of the Japanese at Corregidor, at Bataan? He said, well, yes, I learned to write a beautiful haiku poem. And I thought, oh, he's making a joke. Because obviously, maybe he did write a few before the days he thought he was going to be executed. But that's pretty rough, pretty strange sense of humor. I also said to him, how did you really feel when you got out? She said, well, they declared me dead. I was considered to be dead because nobody had any information about any of us. And my wife, whom I'd married just after graduation from the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, she married another man. I said, I'm really sorry to hear that. He said, lucky me, I came back and married her sister, who was younger and much more beautiful. You've got to look on the bright side. What is that? The Life of Brian? Is that they end up singing "Look on the Bright Side"?
Always look on the bright side of life.
Yeah. I would love to have that played at my ceremony, whatever it's going to be. But, of course, they call it gallows humor. And the Jewish gallows humor, Woody Allen claims that he tells the most representative Jewish version of black gallows humor. And I'm going to repeat it. I don't know if it would make anybody laugh. He says there's two Jews. They're in a death camp, and the officer in charge, the SS man, is taking them to this spot where there is a gallows. There are two nooses hanging down from a pole, and there are just two little orange crates there. And he's instructing them to get up onto the orange crates. And the one man says, well, I can't do that. My feet won't touch the orange crate, and I can't get my head in the noose. And his friend says, why are you always making trouble?
Oh, man.
Well, that's gallows.
That really
humor.
is kind of cringy.
Well, I heard it actually from survivors of the Spanish Civil War. One told me that the great joke was that in Mallorca, where they used to take them out to the cliffs in the wintertime and shoot them, and they'd fall over the cliffs into the sea and be washed away. This one man is being marched out by two of the Guardia Civil, the killers of Franco's special forces. Well, actually, Franco's special forces were the Spanish Foreign Legion, whose motto was Viva la Muerte, long live death. And they had trained many of the Moors, and actually I was told by survivors of the Lincoln Battalion from the Spanish Civil War that when the Moros began their screaming and yelling and hulalaling, that really frightened them, because these were really deadly killers from the Haut Atlas Mountains, the Berbers of Africa. Anyway, this man is being marched out to be shot on the cliff, middle of winter there in Mallorca. It's very cold and wet, and he's saying, "Oh, this is so cold, it's so miserable," and one of the executioners marching along says, "Hey, stop complaining. You don't have to walk all the way back."
I've heard that too.
You have heard that
Yeah,
too.
that's right. And if also who had it really bad in the Spanish War was the Basque, who always tend to have it bad throughout
who did?
history. The Basque. They have a little strip of land on northern Spain.
Oh, the Basques.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, the Basques. Vizcaya. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, the Basques.
They've
Well, of
always
course,
had it bad.
that's where originally the Song of Roland was fought. And
Mhm.
supposedly, Roland was fighting against the Saracen Moors. He was actually fighting against the Basques.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Basques had wiped. They'd been down there raping and pillage and murdering Charlemagne. But that was his great, his.
I did not
warlord.
know that.
Yeah, well, that's the real history. And the battle was in a place called Roncesvalles, which is the most holy spot in all of Spain. It's the beginning of the most ancient and the most sacred of all of, well, as a matter of fact, Zach's father went on it, the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. It's about 900 kilometers long, going to Compostela, where supposedly the bones of St. James are preserved. And that is the beginning of that holy march. And I wrote in one of my books, the book that got me the last dissertation, I was writing about Hemingway, writing in chapter 12, I believe, where he and his buddy are up there in Roncesvalles going trout fishing and perform a little mass. And he's making a joke about that whole thing about Roland and the last words of Roland. But of course, if you look at the beginning and the end of For Whom the Bell Tolls, it's supposed to be outside Segovia, but it's actually in the sort of terrain that is around Roncesvalles, which is Vizcaya, Basque country, just above Pamplona. I love Spain. I know it very well. I have the buona, which is the beret that was worn by, of course, the freedom fighters for the Spanish Republic, and then became the holy idea of a green beret, or of a beret. This isn't amazing how these things get mixed up. Anyway, here we are, Big Ben and Company, KUHS, LP, at 97.9. I think we've done a brilliant broadcast, and I
Yeah.
hope that we can, as I say, it's everything sometimes. But we're coming back to, we talk about the seeds of the Holocaust. The seeds of the Holocaust are ignorance. I think the way we would avoid another Holocaust, or even being bad-mannered, is to know a lot more about our fellow man and woman. Next week, I'm starting my Renaissance Woman series in honor of all the women. We talk about Renaissance men. It's always these women. And there's a woman named Hillary Clinton who used to hang around here, and her husband, Bill, and, well, they're a pretty inspiring couple. That's not political or anything. They're just kind of good old, local folks that done good. Going back east. Anyway, we're going to play now John Cash, the Folsom Rhythm. Why do I keep saying that? The Folsom Prison Blues rhythm. Oh my God, I've always been looking for rhythms like Jerk, like what's his name in the Jerk? I want to
Steve
get rhythm.
Martin.
All I
Yeah.
can get is a foxtrot. There we go.